Okay, David is the Director of Ethics and Responsible Innovation Research. There, I've got your official title. Thank you so much. So we're going to stay with the UK for a few more minutes and really try to draw on David and the role of the Alan Turing and the work that is being done there and across the broader UK AI ecosystem to give us some framing in this moment, and how we take forward a 1 or 2 day event like next week's summit and really ensure that it is driving forward a long-term and sustainable agenda with regard to AI. Yeah, really simple question. But anyways, yeah. But before we do that, for those of you who don't know you, just give us a sense a little bit about the Alan Turing. They're one of our partners. We've been working together for a long time. They are one of those initiatives that came out of that early 2017, really focus on AI. Tell us a little bit about your work and about the Turing.
Sure, and I should just preface this by saying we agreed, Rebecca and myself, to go without, as Jacques Derrida would say, the protection of the text. So we haven't made any plans for this conversation. All right, so yes, the Alan Turing Institute has been around now for quite a few years. I think it represents, this is the National Data Science and Artificial Intelligence Institute. I think this represents this kind of history that you're referring to, right? So I'm in the public policy program. This itself has been around for 6 or 7 years. The work that we do in public policy has really been focused on sort of setting gold standards for good practice in responsible and safe artificial intelligence, and also serving a kind of advisory function for public sector bodies. And so our history is this history. So in 2019, we worked very closely with the Office for AI and Government Digital Service to publish the world's first public sector guidance on AI ethics and safety. And downstream from that, we are just about to publish the first 4 workbooks that will, if you will, represent an operationalization of that initial guidance. So in the National AI Strategy, we were, in a sense, mandated to develop this practice-based guidance, and we're going to be launching that on the second day of the summit in a fringe event. But other work that we've done along the way, in 2020, we worked very closely with the Information Commissioner's Office to publish the world's first and now most referenced public guidance on AI explainability. We, at that time, also started our conversation around 2021 with your Steph, who was then working in the international standards part of DCIT, along with Daniel Akubo. And it was 2.5 years ago, I think, we started the conversation about the AI Standards Hub, which, I mean, it's taken this long to really get it up and running, but that's come out of the Turing with, obviously with the partnership of BSI and NPL, the kind of national metrics organization. And then just downstream from that, we've also basically had a kind of research function. And so we've done work thinking about global data justice. So we've engaged organizations around the world, supported by GPAY and at the time BAYS, to talk to civil society organizations in Aotearoa, New Zealand, in Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, in several places in Africa and Thailand and China, about their concerns with the social justice implications of datafication. So projects like this have really kind of shaped our view. So we straddle between kind of policy advising and basic research. Now, in terms of the bigger question, I do think we are at an inflection point at the moment, to use the maybe well-worn term. I think that not many of us, I think, could have anticipated the kind of commercialization revolution that's happened downstream from the release of ChatGPT. And I think one thing that I would point out here is this is now a moment where what we're dealing with isn't necessarily a shift in a research paradigm, right? It's a shift in scale of impact. And so more than anything, what we need to do, I think, when we start leaning into what the Safety Summit is really going to accomplish, is we need to see the first step as addressing the direct issues that are being brought out by this kind of, I don't know, rapid industrialization of large language models and foundation models, et cetera, whatever your frontier models, whatever you want to call them. But I think we need to see that prioritization, which we're seeing. This is the kind of narrowing that you were talking about before, this narrowing towards safety. I think we need to see that as a first step, right? A manageable first step that also needs to then include further steps to think about the wider societal impacts that clearly we are facing right now with the release, the kind of scaled release of these technologies. And here, of course, this great guidance that you're putting out, I saw in the brief snapshot, it deals with some of these societal impacts. But we do need, I think, to not necessarily just focus on technical safety. And I think that generally speaking, we have to see this moment, and especially the UK's perspective on it, as what can manageably be achieved at a 2-day summit. And so I think that might be some of the reason for the narrowing, but we need to see it holistically and to say that the conversation needs to be much broader than that. It needs to include thinking of things like the undermining of the integrity of information ecosystems. These other components, I was just reading about downstream data pollution, right? This idea that when you have models trained on synthetic data and AI generated data, you will have model collapse ultimately, right? The models will start to kind of narrow, right, the predictions to the most probabilistic, and then the tail, all of the kind of outliers, the important mainstream ideas will get pushed out, and the model's performance will just decline. I mean, obviously also issues about cultural lock-in and about whose data and from where these models are being trained on, and what they're reproducing in terms of the outputs that they're producing. So just to say, I think there's that broader range of issues that we absolutely need to address, because because of this kind of rapid industrialization, commercialization, it will affect generations to come. I mean, I think that moment of, say, December, January was a pivotal moment. Not to overhype it, but I think there is a turning point there where we will deal with a world now where there is real possibilities for, scaled cybersecurity threats, scaled bioterrorism threats, scaled disinformation and propaganda campaigns.
All right. Well, there we go. I mean, we could dig into each one of those, and I think there's, I think each one in some respects is an open research question, right? About whether in fact that is the future is as clear in terms of either the use of the models or the data and where we go next. So I think that is an important inflection moment for this community to be thinking about where we should be turning our attention and what's included. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about I do agree that there is something about narrowing the focus of the summit, which is incredibly useful in this particular moment in terms of being able to accomplish a very specific set of tasks over a day and a half as well. When you reflect on the way in which that has been both communicated more broadly, but also in terms of the way the agenda has been set up, what do you think has been done well, and what would you like to see? What would you have liked to see, or what do you want to see over the next week leading up?
I mean, what I've appreciated is the capacity of the broader UK community to mobilize, right? And so what we've seen around the summit is this kind of burst of activity around what's now called the AI fringe, which, I mean, we all know what's happening with this, right? We have, I don't know, at last count, a dozen events. We're doing one through the Turing and Queen Mary on November 2nd, which you're gonna be a part of as well. And so I think that one of the great things about the UK, and it really is justification for having a summit here, is that there's such a rich tradition of interdisciplinarity and wide-angled lens thinking, right? So we've got, civil society organizations, across the board, digital rights organizations, data rights organizations, that really do want to not have such a narrow kind of focus, right? And so come what may, there will be a broad conversation happening summit week. And I think that's a very good thing. I do think to sort of reflect in a room of friends, I think that we do need to look askance at the possibility that the narrowing would be more than just the summit. And I think the reason why I'm concerned about this is that there is a sense in which a narrowing can, if you will, subserve certain broader private or economic interests, right? So, obviously the narrower that you have a regulatory and governance focus, the less you have interventions in that wider kind of range of societal impacts and concerns, right? And as I see it now, I mentioned that we're at this kind of commercialization moment, right? And what's come along with that, I think, is I think this deeper concern, which is that these frontier models hold so much possibility to advance the public good, to be part of a future where public utility is served by the technology, that it's really putting pressure on the fact that the control of the technologies themselves right now are largely dominated by a handful of large private companies. And so one concern that we need to really explore here is if we think about the conditions of possibility for the advancement of these technologies, we need to think about critical digital infrastructure. And what do we see then? Well, what are the needed layers? We've got data infrastructure, we've got the model engineering or software engineering infrastructure, we've got compute infrastructure, and we've got skills infrastructure, right? So all of these layers. And the question is, okay, well, who can access these infrastructures? And who controls these infrastructures? And I think stepping into a future in which frontier models serve the public interest is a future where we address the kind of barriers to access and control that are presented by having such critical digital infrastructure controlled by companies whose potential interests are to serve as fiduciaries to serve the interests of stakeholders, or I'm sorry, shareholders. So I do think that there's this problem that we really need to think about.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So from a policy or governance perspective, to think about one of those layers of critical digital infrastructure in terms of, are there particularly good governance approaches that you have seen that you would like to point to, either in the UK or beyond globally? And yeah, tell us a little bit about where you have seen good practice that you'd like to see more of.
I mean, I think the conversation should really initially shift towards transparency and accountability first and foremost. Because at the end of the day, the information economy is a reputational economy, right? And so there's a need to kind of manage reputations, and if you have accountability and transparency codified in a governance and regulatory sense, then there is a kind of a protection, a check, right, in the practice. But I think if we were to dig a layer deeper, I think the effective governance and regulation would be, we need to think of how to change incentive structures so that the energies of the innovation are more directed towards the public interest and are more directed towards advancing the social good. And what does that mean to change incentives? Well, there are many ways that different interventions, legislative interventions, governance interventions, even standards interventions, right, can change this incentive base, which might be, we're designing to optimize, this narrow set of goals. We want efficiency, we want to optimize market share, we want to optimize profitability, et cetera. Like, you have that narrow group of incentives that might drive it. But then you can also incentivize, right, innovation to serve health and well-being, right? Or to be oriented first and foremost to considering the social benefit of engaging in the technology. And so I think we do need to think in that direction. I think that the existence of, I think we're entering into a kind of new space here, where the existence of needed regulatory and legislative intervention is something that we need to co-create with policymakers involved, but also impacted communities, developers, obviously the frontier model organizations, that are building these things. And so I don't think we can anticipate what that might look like. I think it's got to be part of a broader dialogue.
Yeah, and I often say, it's there have to be an ecosystem of initiatives, right? There's not going to be one silver bullet or one approach that is either going to work across jurisdictions or within jurisdictions. So thinking about those concentric circles of standards through to regulation, through to voluntary, through to some forms of auditing, and how do we set up that ecosystem of initiatives is going to be crucially important. And absolutely, and who's around the table when we set up those initiatives to be part of that conversation as well.
I think we've done a decent job of prioritizing the engagement of impacted communities. So for instance, I mentioned our national explainability guidance that we produced. That guidance was initially, and this was in 2019 we did this, that guidance was initially shaped by two citizens juries, one in Coventry and one in Manchester. And just as a kind of point of information, up to that point, I don't know if you were reading the literature back then, but AI explainability just meant so-called XAI. It was like, what are the technical approaches, right, to delivering some form of surrogate explainer model or some technique that could shed light on, the relative feature importance, et cetera. And when we engaged with those communities, what they told us was the rationale behind the outputs is important, right? They cared about kind of understanding those types of things. But what they really cared about was being assured that considerations of fairness, bias mitigation, and non-discrimination had been prioritized, being explained that, having it justified to them that considerations about safety and performance, even differential performance for different subgroups had been part of the consideration. And first and foremost, they were concerned that the impacts on people had been part of the process. And so when we wrote that guidance, it went from a starting point that was just about XAI. I remember conversations with the ICO about how are we gonna just kind of knock this out in a month? We'll write up all the techniques. But after that set of engagements, we wrote out this landscape of explainability types that were sort of anchored in fairness explanation and impact explanation and safety and performance explanation in response to what the impacted communities told us. Mm-hmm. And I bring that out because I think we need more of that.
Yeah.
We need, and I think there is a tendency still, it's a knee-jerk reaction to revert to technocracy. So which is to say, in our field, and so I'm obviously at the National Data Science and Artificial Intelligence Institute. So you've got authority that comes from the voice of the sciences and the maths. And that's important, that there is that type of authority. But it's also important not to then treat all problems technocratically. So technology is just a solution that can solve everything. And instead, we need to prioritize what's called civic epistemologies, lived experience, and those insights are what will kind of round the conversation and also interdisciplinarity. So hearing from the sociologists, hearing from the historians, hearing from the anthropologists who are all now steeped in this type of research about AI and its societal impacts, but who might not yet have been brought center stage in the policy conversation. They should all be. And so I think we have work to do, but I think, as I was saying, I think we've tried to, go down that path in the UK.
Yeah, and I think about the work that you've done on citizens councils. I think about the work that the Ada Lovelace Institute has done in all sorts of forms of citizens engagement and work that links directly to some of the initiatives at Partnership on AI on inclusive research and design led by Tina Park, who's here. And I know our new global task force on inclusive AI is going to be meeting over the next couple of days. And I just really think how important it is to widen that aperture and make sure those voices and all voices are around the table and thinking about where this technology is going. And I think that's an important message for policymakers, because I think the question of public opinion and public engagement and citizens' rights and protections is really core and central to the policy debate as well, and needs to be lifted up. Let's turn a little bit, and we're going to now come to you very shortly for comments, questions, and further engagement in the conversation. But let's turn a little bit to the international. So we've talked a little bit about the UK and the work that is happening here, the importance of the UK summit. One of the things that's crucially important about the summit, of course, is that it's an international summit. There'll be 28-ish represented countries around the table. There are a number of initiatives. You and I were just part of the conversation in Japan about the G7 Hiroshima process and where that's going. We've got the OECD, really being a center for this work moving forward. We now have the UN, and they're thinking about. So, I have been actually sort of heartened to see the way in which these groups are attempting to knit together, whether it's the White House commitments through to what may emerge in the UK and elsewhere, and really try to be intentional about some of that work, which I think is important. But it also speaks to how much can happen at the international level versus what needs to happen at the national level. I don't know what your reflections might be on that.
I mean, I think we'll definitely find ourselves in geopolitical headwinds when it comes to actually finding sort of codified and institutionalized ways of controlling the kind of international commerce around AI. That being said, I think it is absolutely crucial to advance the international conversation. And I would add a few to those that you just mentioned. First and foremost, I think the work that's going on at the UN, in particular UNESCO, is really
Absolutely.
Crucial right
Yes.
now. And the reason I mentioned that, I mean, we just talked a little bit about the importance of engaging communities. Engaging communities in the kind of universal context of globally impacting AI technologies means engaging communities that are of the non-West and of the so-called global North. And when we look across the landscape at the international initiatives that have made progress in this, the UNESCO is, as I mentioned, I think probably the most important here. So in 2021, the UNESCO published this ethical recommendation for AI ethics, which was signed on to by the 194 and I think 193 and now 94, with the US coming back in, UNESCO member states. And the reason this is important, this was one of the first documents that integrated some of the important non-Western values into the sort of conversation about where AI policies should go. So for instance, prioritizing the biosphere, prioritizing interconnectivity, things like this. And now as UNESCO is kind of moving to a phase where they're working on the policy actions, I'm on UNESCO's high-level expert group, so that this is where this is coming from. But so what's happened is they thought initially there would only be maybe 10 member states signing on to be early adopters of these policy actions. A week passed, 2 weeks passed away, was maybe around 20, then 30, then 40. I think it's up to now maybe 50 or so UNESCO member states that are signing on to be early adopters of the UNESCO AI ethics recommendations. That's significant, and they're mostly from the non-global North, right? From the historically characterized global South. And so I would just again highlight that work is very important, because it's not that there's all criticism that UNESCO doesn't have any teeth in the international environment. UN doesn't anyway. But the advancement of these initiatives will increase readiness, right, in these countries. It will enable there to be a kind of more coalition-based voice, say, for countries in Africa to come to sort of come to the surface and be at the table when it comes to standards development and be standards makers rather than standards takers, right? Which is really one of the bits that's so crucial. So just to say, I think that the UNESCO initiative is very important. The other international initiative that I'd mention is the work of the Council of Europe, and also full disclosure, I'm the specialist advisor to the Committee on Artificial Intelligence at the Council of Europe. So, Council of Europe started way back in, I believe, 2020, developing this program to build out a convention that aligns artificial intelligence with human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And it's been a tremendous effort so far. They published a feasibility study that actually the UK led in writing one of the chapters of, and has really been very involved. I think we also, I was on the, through the UK, I was on the CAI, the original committee's bureau, and then we now have another UK member of the Council of Europe's Committee on Artificial Intelligence Bureau. But over time, what's happened is there's been negotiation. By the end of this year, they should have the actual convention written, and they're going to try to operationalize the convention through a human rights, democracy, and the rule of law impact assessment, which involves a stakeholder engagement process, context-based risk analysis, an actual impact assessment, impact mitigation planning stages, iterative reassessment of how the whole governance process is working. And so the rubber will hit the road, right? When it comes to the way that's the thinking about applying a rights-based approach to the governance of artificial intelligence works. So I think there's a lot of good work internationally right now, and I'm an optimist in the sense that I think all of this will contribute to the development of the broader conversation, and it needs to be, regardless of the geopolitical headwinds, these things need to happen. Because it expands the vocabularies that are available to think about law and governance on the national level, but also on the international level.
Yeah, such a good point. I think a lot of agreement in terms of thinking about all of those different approaches and then how they are all going to emerge in all sorts of different ways for application moving forward. Questions, comments, thoughts, advice?